You know, when you hear the name Galapagos Islands, you probably think of Charles Darwin, right? Or maybe all that incredible, unique wildlife. It's like this perfect natural laboratory. But what's really fascinating is that it's also a unique human laboratory. It's a place where totally different ideas about what justice even is just smash right into each other. So let's dive into this tale of two laws. One is ancient, and the other, well, it was forged in the fire of some pretty intense modern conflict.
And this really gets to the heart of what makes the Galapagos so interesting from a human perspective. Think about this. The islands had no native people. None. So every single person living there is a migrant or a descendant of migrants from mainland Ecuador. So what happens when things go wrong, when a conflict breaks out? Whose rules do you follow? Do you stick with the traditions you brought from the mainland, or do you have to invent something completely new just for the island?
All right, so let's start with the first one, the traditions that people brought over with them. We're going to focus on the Quechua indigenous people from mainland Ecuador, because their vision of justice is, well, it's deeply, deeply rooted in the idea of community and keeping things in balance.
The whole philosophy is built around this concept called buen vivir, which literally means the good way of living. And here's the key idea, the thing you really need to get. A crime isn't just one person hurting another. No, it's seen as a tear in the fabric of the whole community. It throws everything off balance. So for them, justice isn't just about punishing the person who did wrong. It's about mending that tear, about fixing the fabric of the community itself.
And how do they do that? Well, it's not done behind closed doors. It's this very structured, very public process. First, the conflict is announced to everyone, then it's investigated, and then the whole thing is resolved in a public assembly. You've got everything from public scolding and advice to a formal apology, and then finally, the punishment. The key thing is everybody's involved. It's a community thing from start to finish.
Okay, and this is where our modern brains might do a double take. That punishment part, sometimes it involves things like a ritual whipping with nettles. And I know what you're thinking, but here's the twist. From the Quechua perspective, this isn't about revenge or just causing pain. It's seen as, well, medicinal. It's an act of cleansing, of purifying the person, so they can be corrected and brought back into the fold, back into the community.
So, that's one system of justice, the ancient, hominy-focused way. But it's not the only game in town, not by a long shot. The very unique, very high-pressure life on the Galapagos actually created a totally different approach. And this one wasn't born from ancient tradition. It was born from straight-up, violent conflict.
Yeah, on the islands themselves, the story played out very differently. This wasn't about keeping some ancient harmony alive. This was about survival. It was a fight over limited resources. We're talking fish, lobster, valuable sea cucumbers. It created this super pragmatic, sometimes brutal reality that just demanded a whole new way of solving problems. And it all came to a head in the 1990s. The islands literally exploded into what people started calling the resource wars. You had these top-down conservation laws coming from the government, and they were clashing, I mean violently clashing, with the people who actually made their living there, the fishermen, the tour operators. And what were they fighting over? Access to all that incredibly valuable marine life. Believe me, it was the opposite of harmonious.
But out of all that chaos, something really interesting happened. A totally homegrown solution popped up, the Grupo Nucleo. Now, this group wasn't trying to restore some kind of spiritual balance. Nope, this was pure pragmatism. It was a group made up of all the different stakeholders, designed to hammer out a consensus between all these competing groups. It was simply about finding a deal that everyone could live with so they could stop fighting.
Okay, so let's pause. We've got two very different models on the table, right? You have the ancient restorative justice of the Quechua, and then you have this modern, get-a-deal-done, consensus-driven model born on the islands. Now, just to make things even more interesting, what happens when the national government tries to make room for both in its own constitution? And this slide just perfectly lays out the massive headache this creates. Ecuador's 2008 constitution basically sets up a two-lane highway for justice. On one side, it officially recognizes the government's own mediation system. But on the other side, it also recognizes the right of indigenous groups to use their own traditional legal systems. The huge, glaring problem? It never ever says which one gets the right of way. Who's in charge when they conflict?
And believe me, this isn't just some abstract legal debate. This ambiguity has led to some incredibly dramatic, real-world messes. Let me tell you about the La Cocha Guantapolo case.
Just look at how this played out. It's wild. So, a murder happens. The local indigenous authorities do exactly what the Constitution says they can do. They apply their own customary justice to the suspects. Simple enough, right? Wrong. The national government then steps in. The state prosecutor starts a separate criminal investigation, and get this, they don't just go after the murder suspects, they arrest the indigenous leaders who handed out the traditional punishment in the first place. So now, the suspects are facing justice twice for the same crime, and the leaders are facing prison time for following the law as they understood it. This chart really puts it all into perspective. We're talking about three completely different worlds with different goals. You've got the customary or indigenous model, where the core value is collective harmony and the goal is to fix the community. Then you've got the Galapagos model, born from conflict, where it's all about getting stakeholders to agree on a practical solution. And then there's the Western model that most of us are familiar with. Here, it's all about the individual, and the main goal is just to get a final binding agreement and move on.
Okay, so what's the point of all this? I mean, it's a fascinating story about a remote group of islands, but what does it mean for the rest of us? Well, it turns out the lessons here are hugely important for anyone, anywhere, who deals with conflict.
The big idea that comes out of all this is something called adaptive mediation. And it's pretty simple, really. It says you can't have a cookie-cutter, one-size-fits-all approach to solving problems. It just doesn't work. Instead, you have to be flexible. You have to build a process that the people involved actually feel like they own, one that makes sense in their specific cultural world.
And this isn't just some high-level theory either. It gives us a practical toolkit. Like before you even think about mediating, you've got to do your homework and really understand the cultural context. You need to co-design the process with the people involved, not just force it on them. Maybe that means bringing in community elders. And you have to question your own assumptions. For instance, we think confidentiality is crucial, right? But what if you're in a culture where a public apology is the only thing that can actually heal the community?
When you boil it all down, the lesson from the Galapagos is both profound and incredibly simple. The resolutions that actually work, the ones that stick and create real, lasting peace, they're never the ones forced on people from the outside. They're the ones that grow organically from inside the community itself, the ones that line up with what that community truly values.
And that leaves us with a really tough question to think about. In our world today, which is full of overlapping cultures and different legal systems, when ancient tradition goes head-to-head with modern law, who should get to decide? Who gets the final say on what justice really means?